The call for help. The great chamber of the Galactic Council was ablaze with holographic projections. Delegates from a dozen star systems argued in 100 tongues, their translated voices a cacophony that bounced off the metallic walls. Ambassador Litra of the Leon Collective swiveled her multifaceted eyes in agitation, the chitinous plates of her exoskeleton clicking softly. Order, order. Her voice, amplified and pitched for maximum effect, cut through the din. Our worlds are in flames, and we must act. The quorum delegate, a towering insectile creature with serrated mandibles, hissed in amusement. Act, little Leon? Is that what you call this pathetic display? Your worlds burn because you are weak. A ripple of outrage crossed the chamber. The lions were a peaceful species known for their art and philosophy, not for war. But they were also one of the founding races of the Council, and their worlds were not accustomed to being reduced to ash. The quorum will answer for this, Litra threatened, her voice trembling slightly. The insectile ambassador let out a rasp that served as laughter in his species. Answer to whom? This council? Your armies are dust, your fleets are scattered. There is no one left to answer to but us. It was true. The speed of the quorum onslaught had been breathtaking, as terrifying as it was strategically brilliant. They had refused to play by the council's rules of engagement, preemptively striking Leon outposts before a formal declaration of war could even be transmitted. Litra felt a surge of despair. They had been too slow, too trusting of the peace their council had worked so hard to build. Now they were paying the price in Leon lives. We are not yet defeated, she insisted. The Orions fight with the strength of 10. The Valorans still hold their home system for now. The quorum sneered, but their time will come, as will yours. His gaze settled on a section of the chamber that had remained conspicuously silent. A curtained alcove set apart from the raised tiers where the rest of the delegates gathered. Inside, shrouded in carefully cultivated shadow, was the delegation from Earth. Humans. Perhaps your humans will save you. The quorum taunted, his voice dripping with derision. The human proposal. Humans were the enigma of the council. They had only communicated through remote links for the few decades they'd been members, never sending a physical representative to the Grand Chamber. The council knew little of the bipedal mammals beyond their seemingly average technological prowess and their unsettling expansion tendencies within their own solar system. The humans had always been a wild card, unpredictable. Now it seemed the council's very survival hinged on their next move. The silence from the alcove stretched painfully long. Then came a single word, transmitted into the chamber in a low, accented voice, a voice the council had never heard before. Perhaps. A ripple of surprise echoed through the chamber. The quorum ambassador paused mid-hiss, his mandibles clicking open and shut in confusion. The other delegates stared in a mixture of horror and anticipation toward the curtained alcove. The human voice continued, slow and deliberate. The quorum ambassador is correct. This council is weak. Its protocols, its traditions, these are relics of an age now devoured by war. Litra gasped. Never had a delegation, much less the enigmatic humans, spoken so disrespectfully in this hallowed hall. But there was a strange ring of truth to it. Had inaction doomed them all? The quorum have played by their own rules. The human said, rules written with the blood of your worlds. To answer them, to defeat them, we must cast aside the old ways. We must become something new. A figure emerged from the darkness of the alcove, stepping into the harsh light of the chamber. He was tall for a human, garbed in a simple utilitarian jumpsuit, but there were flecks of gray in his close-cropped hair, and his face was weathered, marked with lines that spoke of a life lived outside the comforts of starships and climate-controlled habitats. My name is General Marcos, he announced, his voice resonating in the vast space. I speak for Earth. He fixed the quorum ambassador with a chillingly calm stare. I assure you, the quorum's time is at an end. A desperate gamble. A wave of uneasy muttering swept through the chamber. Marcos's words were bold, arrogant even, yet after consecutive quorum victories, there was a desperate hunger for such defiance coursing through the assembled delegates. The quorum ambassador's mandibles clacked angrily. Empty boasts, little mammal, he sneered. "Your ships are primitive. Your warriors have never tasted battle on this scale." Marcos offered a mirthless smile. "Primitive, perhaps, but with a brutality you haven't begun to comprehend." He turned towards the rest of the council. "My proposal is simple. Grant Earth full strategic authority. Place your forces, your shipyards, and the resources of your worlds at our disposal. In return, we'll show you what real war looks like." Litra's multifaceted eyes narrowed. This was madness, to place such trust, such power, in the hands of a race they barely understood. But hadn't they already failed by trusting in the old ways? "We cannot," sputtered the Valran delegate, a stout reptilian swathed in swirling robes. "This is surrender." "It's a gamble," retorted Marcos, "but a gamble with far better odds than the path you're on now. We've studied the Quorum. We know how their minds work, their tactics, their weaknesses. Now it's a question of whether you've got the stomach for what we'll have to do." His gaze swept over the council once more. "So the question is simple. Do you want to live, or do you want to die clinging to your precious traditions?" Silence settled across the chamber, a heavy blanket stifling the anxious murmurs. Litra felt a knot twist in her gut. To side with the humans was to abandon all she knew, to rewrite the very rules of this galactic society, and yet to reject them was to seal the doom of her world and countless others. The turning tide. The Valoran delegate hissed in indecision, his beady eyes darting between Marcos, the Quorum ambassador, and even the humans. The Quorum seemed momentarily taken aback by the humans' audacity. Finally, a booming voice echoed from the Orion delegation. A warrior the size of a small shuttle, encased in gleaming battle armor, stepped forward. "The Orion clans have grown weary of this council's inaction," he declared, hefting a massive energy axe. "We will follow this human. We are born for war, and we thirst for the blood of those who have wronged us." An immediate chorus of hisses and growls rose from the surrounding Orion delegates, a bloodthirsty echo to his sentiment. The Orion fleet, though battered by the Quorum assault, was still a force to be reckoned with. With their support, the tide of opinion began to shift. Litra weighed the risk, her heart pounding against her segmented thorax. The humans were an unknown variable, a desperate gamble, but they were perhaps the only gamble left. "Lian stands with Earth," she declared, her voice rising above the din. "Let us fight fire with fire." A wave of mixed gasps and cheers followed Litra's decision. The Valoran representative, seeing the momentum turn, reluctantly offered his own hesitant assent. One by one, other delegates voiced their agreement, their fear slowly drowned out by a desperate need for action, fueled by Marcos's chillingly confident words. Finally, all eyes turned to the Quorum ambassador. He reared his insectoid form, rage twisting his mandibles in a grotesque display. "You fools," he screeched, spittle flying from his maw. "You've signed your own death warrants. The Quorum swarm will devour you whole." Marcos simply nodded, his expression chillingly blank. "Then the feast begins," he replied. With a single decisive gesture, he turned and disappeared back into the curtained alcove. The human strategy. The chamber erupted into a frenzy of activity. Delegates clamored for information, for instructions, for anything that would ease the gnawing fear in their hearts. Orders echoed, urgent transmissions cut through the chaotic noise. The vast machinery of the Galactic Council was shifting into a mode it had never known. Total, uncompromising war. And at the center of it all stood the humans, their sudden dominance as jarring as it was necessary. Within cycles, Marcos revealed his strategy in a presentation that left the council delegates both horrified and perversely fascinated. The days of staged battles and formal declarations were over. There would be no quarter given, no prisoners taken. "This is about survival," Marcos declared, his image projected onto massive screens. "The Quorum do not negotiate. They do not take pity. They simply eradicate. For them, this is an extermination, and we must respond in kind." Whispers of alarm rippled through the chamber. This was not the war any of them had envisioned, but Marcos was relentless. "Target their brood planets," he commanded, his tone as cold as deep space. "Cut down their supply lines. Strike their fleets mid-warp, leaving them adrift in the void. turned their own technology, their own ruthlessness, against them. The humans had spent those initial hours analyzing every scrap of data available on their new enemy. They pinpointed key logistical hubs, dissected quorum communication networks, and identified the biological vulnerabilities concealed within their armored carapaces. Leetra's mind raced. This was genocide, the very thing they'd struggled to prevent. And yet the quorum had forced their hand. Should she, condemn her own people to extinction in the name of moral righteousness? She looked at the holographic projections of ruined Leon cities, the charred and broken bodies of her kin, and felt the cold steel of resolve harden within her. Lan will do what must be done, she said, her voice a thin thread against the rising din of the council chamber. The new warriors, Marcos's plan was more than just a strategy. It was a complete paradigm shift in the way galactic war was waged. While the council species had fought like civilized duelists, the humans were about to unleash the true savagery of combat upon the quorum. In the weeks that followed, the humans redesigned starships for speed and stealth, sacrificing layers of defense in favor of overwhelming firepower. Shipyards across the council territories hummed day and night, refitting vessels for this new purpose under watchful human eyes. Lion scientists, their knowledge of art and philosophy reproposed with chilling efficiency, developed bioweapons tailored to inflict agonizing deaths upon quorum physiology. Orion shock troopers were trained in lightning-fast hit-and-run tactics, emerging from the shadows to strike vulnerable quorum outposts before melting back into the darkness. The council, hardened under human tutelage, became a weapon honed to a razor's edge. Meanwhile, the quorum continued their advance, arrogantly unaware of the dark storm gathering against them. Their scout ship transmissions revealed a growing confusion as supply lines were inexplicably severed and seemingly impregnable bases fell silent overnight. When the human-led counterattack finally commenced, it came not with a flourish and bravado, but with calculated, deadly precision. Quorum armadas, caught off guard, were torn apart with shocking ease. Brood worlds, accustomed to generations of peace, were reduced to toxic clouds. The council races, emboldened by a string of unexpected victories, fought with newfound ferocity. The tide had turned, and it had done so with horrifying speed. News of the battlefield triumph spread like a brush fire through the beleaguered council territories. The initial dread began to melt, replaced by a flicker of desperate hope. Were the humans, these ruthless strategists from an insignificant planet, truly the ones to save a crumbling galactic society? The cost of victory. Yet alongside every victory report came disturbing echoes of the tactics employed. The brutality unleashed matched and at times surpassed that of the quorum themselves. Some delegates whispered in private of atrocities committed in the name of survival, biological warfare, scorched earth tactics, the summary execution of prisoners. The council chamber, once a place of debate and diplomacy, became a tense war room. Holographic projections of battlefields flashed constantly, and updates came in a relentless torrent, punctuated by the dry, emotionless voice of General Marcos. The humans were winning, yet the cost seemed to grow with each passing cycle. Leetra found herself caught between the pride of her people's newfound strength and the chilling unease about the monster they had helped create. Had they bartered their principles to save their lives? What would they become once the quorum threat was finally eradicated? The quorum, caught in the vice grip of the humans' merciless strategy, scrambled to counter these unfamiliar tactics. They rushed to safeguard their brood worlds, pulled back their advanced forces to consolidate their defenses. Yet for the first time in this devastating war, the once invincible quorum were the ones reacting, always a step behind their newfound nemesis. As the war shifted in the council's favor, a new dynamic emerged within its hallowed halls. The humans' grip on the strategic planning was unbreakable. Marcos stood at the center of it, an enigmatic figure who neither sought nor welcomed praise, merely laid out ruthless plans that seemed to ensure victory. Leetra found herself grappling with the implications of their alliance. The humans had delivered on their promise, but at what cost? The shifting morality. As reports of human tactics filtered through the council, a sense of moral ambiguity began to pervade the once unified resolve. The humans' willingness to employ biological weapons designed to cause maximum suffering raised uncomfortable questions about the price of victory. These weapons, though devastatingly effective, painted a gruesome picture of the lengths humanity was willing to go. Delegates who once championed the alliance now found themselves questioning if they had unleashed something far more dangerous than the Quorum. Letra's nights were restless, haunted by visions of her ravaged world juxtaposed against the atrocities being committed in the name of survival. Could they truly justify such means, even in the face of extinction? She often found herself in the chamber's quiet corners, discussing the ethics of their strategies with like-minded delegates. Their conversations were hushed, filled with unease, and always ended with the same unsettling conclusion. There seemed no alternative but to follow the path laid out by the humans. The ruthless efficiency of war. Marcos's strategic brilliance was undeniable. Under his direction, the Council forces executed maneuvers with a precision that left the Quorum reeling. Supply lines were cut with surgical accuracy, leaving entire Quorum fleets adrift and vulnerable. Key planets were targeted in swift, devastating strikes that left no survivors. The humans' approach to war was systematic, almost mechanical in its brutality. The Council's military apparatus, once a collection of disparate and often inefficient forces, had been transformed into a formidable war machine. Human engineers redesigned starships, focusing on speed and firepower over traditional defensive measures. Alien scientists were repurposed from their peaceful studies to create devastating bioweapons and new technologies for warfare. The integration of various species' strengths under human direction created a force that was greater than the sum of its parts. The human machine, General Marcos himself, was an enigma. To many, he appeared devoid of emotion, a cold strategist whose only concern was the next victory. His eyes, often described as piercing and calculating, seemed to see through the facades of the Council delegates. He spoke little outside of strategic briefings, and when he did, it was with a calm, unwavering confidence that unsettled many. Marcos's leadership style was starkly different from what the Council was accustomed to. He demanded absolute obedience and offered little in the way of explanation. His plans were laid out with a finality that left no room for debate, only execution. Some found his methods tyrannical, but the results were indisputable. Under his command, the tide of war had shifted dramatically in their favor. The psychological toll. The psychological toll of the war weighed heavily on the delegates and their respective populations. News of the brutal tactics employed by both sides seeped into the public consciousness, causing widespread fear and unrest. Protests erupted on various worlds, with citizens questioning the morality of their leaders' decisions. The once idealistic visions of a united galaxy had been replaced by a grim determination to survive at any cost. Letra, burdened by the weight of her choices, became a focal point for both criticism and support. She received messages daily from her people, some thanking her for their continued survival, others condemning her for aligning with such ruthless allies. Her resolve was tested constantly, and she often sought solace in the quiet, reflective spaces of the Council chambers, away from the cacophony of war. A glimpse of the future. Despite the growing unease, victories continued to mount. The Quorum, once an unstoppable force, were now on the defensive. Each victory brought a mix of relief and dread. The cost of their alliance with the humans was high, but it was also the only thing standing between them and annihilation. As the war drew closer to a potential end, thoughts turned to the future. What would the galaxy look like once the Quorum were defeated? The Council delegates, now hardened by war and bound by the bloodshed they had overseen, would have to navigate a post-war reality shaped by human influence. Letra often pondered this uncertain future. Would the galaxy revert to its old ways, or had the humans fundamentally changed the course of their civilization? In the end, the cost of victory was more than just lives and resources. It was a transformation of identity, a reshaping of moral boundaries, and a stark realization that survival often demands a price that leaves lasting scars. The delegates, once driven by lofty ideals, now faced the grim task of rebuilding a galaxy in the shadow of their choices, forever changed by the war that had almost consumed them.